Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Serious Sam 2 for PC, Linux, and Xbox. This is technically the third game in the Serious Sam series if you count both of the Encounter games as their own separate thing, but anyway. This is the sequel to the second Encounter, and it was released in October of 2005, and it's kind of interesting because it was released on Xbox. And so we looked at it and went, well, Xbox, odd, but okay. At any rate, the game itself got a lot of negativity from a lot of Serious Sam fans who felt that they kind of went too far with one particular aspect, which I'll get to in a moment. But as you can see, it is a very different style from Serious Sam first and second Encounters as far as the art style and everything goes. But was that the only thing that changed, or did they keep the Serious Sam gameplay and improve upon it, or what happened? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it is certainly a step up from the previous game in the series as far as the engine itself goes. The modeling is better, the textures are better, the animations are smoother, and there's quite a bit of detail packed into this game, especially for 2005. But there is one thing that you do notice, and that is that the environments seem to be a bit smaller than the previous games in the series, particularly in certain instances where they open up quite a bit. And as a result, the game doesn't feel like it has the big scale that the previous two games do. Although there are moments where it kind of gets that, the visual style in general doesn't really convey that as well as it did in the previous two games. Now, that said, there is one big change with the visuals, and that was the art style. And this is where a lot of people really got turned off by this game, in fact, myself included. Because the art style went almost completely cartoony this time around. Basically, the only thing it was lacking was cell shading. And as a result, everything is ridiculously exaggerated. All of the colors are really bright and vibrant, which admittedly is a good thing, don't get me wrong. But the way they've done all of the modeling and such like that, it's this ridiculously exaggerated art style that really comes across as ridiculous rather than actually a good art style. And it makes the game really cheesy. So, you have this art style that is pretty much a complete opposite of what they did with the first and second Encounter, which was relatively realistic looking, but still vibrant and colorful. If they had kept that and simply updated the visuals to be more in touch with the technology and such like that, then it probably would have been just fine. But them switching the art style so dramatically was just really jarring, and it's really hard to get used to. Luckily, the sound design is still pretty far up there in terms of quality. The sound effects themselves are pretty much beefy across the board. The music is pretty decent for the most part. It's not quite as good as the previous two games' soundtracks, but it's pretty much up there. And the voice acting in general is pretty decent, although there is the pretty big problem of the natives, who sound ridiculous. And it's actually rather annoying whenever they open their mouths and babble to you constantly, because they do this throughout the game, and it gets really annoying when you have all these ridiculous-looking alien creatures babbling endlessly, and just drove me nuts. Sam at least still has his quips and everything, and it's still the same voice, but the native voices just annoy me to no end. But it's not really the presentation that matters here. No, what really matters are the story and the gameplay. And the story in this one, well, let's just say that if it were the main focus of the game, and it were not a Serious Sam game, it would present pretty big problems, because the plot in this game is actually pretty crappy. You once again play as Serious Sam Stone, and this takes place after the events of the second Encounter. He is summoned by the Syrian Great Council, and the Syrians look absolutely nothing like they did in the previous two games. Because if you don't remember, we actually saw what Syrians looked like. They look like humans. And the Syrians in Serious Sam 2 don't look anything like humans. They just look really malformed. They look like the natives that you encounter. They look completely ridiculous. They're like bobbleheads. At any rate, they tell him to go on this quest to find 5 pieces of the MacGuffin, which is this amulet that, if all 5 pieces are united, then, of course, Mental will be vulnerable, so they say. And basically that's the entire plot. He has to go to 5 different planets in order to get these pieces of the medallion, and then you get to endgame. And endgame's actually kind of ridiculous, because the ending to this game in particular is just downright what? I don't even. And the entire way the story is told is in such a way that it comes across as ridiculously cheesy. Now, you have to keep in mind that the previous 2 games, this 2 encounter games, were cheesy, yes, but they were tastefully cheesy. They were endearingly cheesy, where it would have corny one-liners that would make you chuckle a bit, or different references to pop culture and stuff like that that you couldn't help but get a chuckle out of as well. And it never went overboard with it. Whereas in Serious Sam 2, it goes completely off the rails with it. And they kind of lost themselves in how ridiculously corny this game is. And as a result, it becomes outright annoying. Especially when most of the jokes in this game aren't even funny, and it's making them constantly. Now, it's one thing to have this monster jumping around and wearing a really badly made health kit costume, and when you run up to him, it's basically secret fake health has been found. Okay, that's kind of funny. It's at least worth a chuckle. But then you get to the later stuff in the game. It's just not funny. Like, secret large poo has been found. Really? You went there? Okay. And so the humor ends up falling flat most of the time, and while there are a few good jokes here and there, they are few and far between compared to the ones that are outright crap. And so, unlike the previous games in the series, the 2 encounter games, the jokes come across as outright ridiculous and annoying, as opposed to cheesy and endearing. So, does the rest of the game save it? Well, it is pretty much your Serious Sam experience. You're still running around blasting lots of enemies with big guns. And most of the guns from the previous games are intact, like the single shotgun actually being changed from a pump action into a revolving shotgun, but functionally it's still the same. Double barrel shotgun, all sorts of different things. They've redesigned the looks of them, but the functionality is pretty much the same for the most part. So you do have some alterations here and there, like the revolvers are now 44 Magnums as opposed to the Schofields that you had in the previous games. And the, like I said, the shotguns are different. The Tommy gun is now dual Uzis, stuff like that. Functionally still the same, but they look different, and they've been changed to fit the new art style. Now, they did also give you a few new weapons, like, for instance, the Syrian Blaster that you get throughout the entire game. It's an infinite ammo pistol that you can charge up, and it actually does a fair amount of damage. And so, you also have things like the plasma gun, which is pretty much like the laser gun, only it's plasma. So, that's a different way of doing things, but pretty much everything from Serious Sam First and Second Encounter is intact. They did also add in the ability to have items, which you can use things like grenades, for instance, which is now your secondary fire. You can throw grenades at your enemies, and you get plenty of those. You get items such as the Klodovik, which is a bird that flies at enemies and then just annihilates them, and so on and so forth. It actually adds quite a bit of variety to the game that the previous 2 didn't have. In addition, because you travel to a lot of different worlds, each of them has their own unique look and feel, and each of them also has their own unique enemy set, which some of them do overlap a bit. But for the most part, it provides you with some much-needed variety, although a lot of the enemies are pretty much the same thing. They just look different, so it gives you the illusion of variety, whereas functionally there's a lot of overlap. But at the same time, it's still nice to have this variety, although some of the enemies are just downright stupid, like witches. And they're the extremely stereotypical fairy tale looking witches. You sit there going, really? You're going for this? Ugh. And so you have this nice enemy variety, you have the item variety. They modified the health and armor system to where you can now actually get 200 health as your standard. You you of course start with 100, but you can actually get it with normal health items as opposed to just boosters like the special 100 health or the +1s. And so that's actually pretty nice, and the same goes for the armor. And there is a problem with this, though. It kind of makes the game too easy. And the previous two games in the series were pretty hard, actually, particularly when you got to the later parts of the game. Whereas this one, not really. It never really goes beyond mildly challenging. And if you know what you're doing, you can get through the game pretty easily. So it never really becomes the level of challenge that Serious Sam 1, the first and second encounters did. But at the same time, you might wonder why that is. Well, it's because the level design is different. Now, in this one, they give you the ability to have different vehicles and such, which is a nice bit of variety from the typical just run around and blast stuff Serious Sam kind of thing. But there are a lot less wide-open environments in this game as compared to the previous one. There's a lot more corridors, and a lot more corridor-like things. It's a much more linear game than the previous game was. Now, don't get me wrong, the previous games were very linear, but they didn't feel all that linear because they were so wide and open. Whereas this one narrows it down quite a lot. There's a lot of passageways that you had to go through as opposed to just going through the vast open expanse and then being directed by, oh, there's this thing over here, which very clearly I need to go to, but I'm going to explore a bit. Whereas in this one, you don't really get the chance to explore all that much. It is there, but it's reduced. And so the level design doesn't feel as refined and proper as the previous two games did. And so you have this level design coupled with often brain-dead enemy AI, which just charges directly at you and gets itself annihilated very, very easily, coupled with the much more easy health system that this game has. And what do you get? You get a game that's not particularly challenging. Now, they did throw in a life system as well, and I'm not really sure why they did that. It's really weird having lives in this game, because the previous two games didn't have that. But they threw in a life system, and you sit there going, okay, I don't get it, but whatever. Now, that said, the gameplay itself is decent, but it's a weird situation where mechanically there's nothing really outright wrong with it, but it just doesn't feel right. Now, obviously you can say that there's something wrong with it being a bit too easy, but at the same time, you have to understand why that was. It was because first and second encounters threw tons and tons of enemies at you, and it was a situation where the ammo was very, very scarce, and you didn't have much health to work with, and pretty much everything was a trap. Whereas in this one, it doesn't feel like that. Ammo is plentiful. And apart from the situations where you move to different planets and you've lost all of your gear again, it never really becomes challenging. It's always gives you way too much for what you need to do. And so, the majority of the game actually ends up being boring as a result. And so, not only does mechanically, the shooting feels fine and everything, but not only does it become too easy, but it becomes monotonous and boring as a result, and that's why it doesn't feel right. Now, again, mechanically, there's nothing outright wrong with it. It's not bad. It's just not well implemented. And they decided to go this radically different route with the art style and the set of humor and everything that really does wear on you quite a bit. But all of this combined is what makes Serious Sam 2 a very underwhelming game. You might be able to get something out of it. I mean, like I said, the mechanics themselves are not bad, and there is some fun to be had here and there. But if you go into this thing expecting the greatness that was the first encounter and the good follow-up that was the second encounter, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because it's not there. Instead, you get a game that has good intentions, and you can tell they actually tried with it. But while it does retain most of the elements that the previous games had, it doesn't quite do them right, and it doesn't really do the previous two games justice. That's why I give it a 2.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.